Welcome back, AP. So we are going to not really. Hold on. My wife is running Broad Street, and I'm trying to coordinate with my sister-in-law so we can go like yell yay and stuff. And I can't forget to bring a clementine. So not really coordinating. Anyway, so what we're gonna finish up talking about today is kind of just the big cultural trends going into the interwar years, right? We're going to talk about things in a less generic fashion, okay? So usually whenever you're in high school, they refer to this time period as like oh my God. They refer to this time period as like, oh, the Roaring Twenties and blah, 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 yeah, like yada, 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 yada. Which is all fine and good, but when they're talking about the Roaring Twenties, they're mainly just talking about like the incorporation of the mass marketplace, mass media, things like that. The image of the new woman, and we'll get there. But a lot of this era is mainly just reactionary to the carnage and the ridiculousness that was World War I. So we were talking about philosophy, right? And then we're going to talk about architecture, Christian revival, art, music. Got it? Now, anyway, so let's get after it right here. So, and science too. Forgot about science. Bergson experienced just about as ration. He is one of the big Nietzsche descendants, right? Sorel, same thing. But two new schools of thought are going to pop up after World War I. The one is called logical positivism. Now, positivism, you can just like star positivism or underline positivism. And it's the idea that a philosophy sees that the only thing you can really go by is provable facts. And we talked about this in class. I'm just reviewing it a little bit. Not to mention the fact that the downside is it's got a very limited scope for the poor. And then you got existentialism. Existentialism is the big one. I'm a big fan of existentialism. I just think it sounds kind of neat. Now, keep in mind, you should never be a purist about anything. But existentialism is kind of cool. So existentialism is the idea that philosophy stresses the meaninglessness of existence, right? So it's saying that, like, no one put you here on purpose. No one did any of those things. You need to just basically try to find don't worry about your existence, because if you exist, you exist. If you don't, you don't. Just try to find meaning in this direct through life, right? So the extensionalists, most thinkers of these time periods they were atheists, which was a really, really big rebelling against the common standard. That's a huge reaction to World War I, because that was almost unheard of in Europe during this time period, and during any time period for that matter. Everyone was pious for like ever. And then existence precedes essence, right? So that quote is a famous quote from a guy named Kierkegaard. He actually is trying to explain the fact that your existence is proven. Your essence must be found, right? Like, so life is considered meaningless, so you must create your own meaning, right? Now, more stress on the individuals. I like this, like existentialism a lot, because I think it's a moral code without the baggage. So basically, existentialism stresses the idea that your essence and your moral codes can be found within the fact that there's a huge responsibility on you. Existentialism places a massive amount of responsibility on the individual. That your everyday experiences completely dictate how you perceive the world. You are faced with different experiences at complete random, and that you must actually, a moral code is in any choice you make, you are now responsible for. So it stresses this heavy amount of responsibility. I like that. I think it's cool. No one's making you do anything. It's just responsibility. You have to do it. So leading forward, though, hold on, I got a good picture right here. It's your guy, Vlad. Leading forward, though, you also had a huge revival in Christianity, ironically enough. Some of you are like, well, wait a minute, you were just saying that philosophy turned away from it. Yeah, that's true, but remember, the philosophers were mainly in the scope of their own field and in their own schools of thought. The regular commoner wasn't reading Kierkegaard or Sorel or who else, Nietzsche, or delving into libraries and reading Immanuel Kant, you know what I mean? Like, they're not doing that. So the revival of Christianity was linked mostly to a better interpretation of the Bible, right? This is a big thing because it's going to try, like, the established churches are going to do their best to interpret the Bible and try their best to try and hold hands with science instead of contradicting it. So they're going to promote the moral teachings over the grand claims, and by that I mean they're going to start looking at the stories in the Bible as stories, okay? They're going to look at them as stories and evidence of people faced with decisions that you can then like see how they made moral better choices off of. So the famous one, remember we talked about Friedrich Nietzsche saying God is dead, right? Killed by mediocrity. Kierkegaard is a famous Christian philosopher who coined the phrase a leap of faith, right? So he discusses how no human can prove the existence of God. It's just unprovable. You can't do it. So to be a Christian is to take a great leap of faith, right? So the leap of faith is like taking the chance and hoping that he's there and living your life in that emblematic idea. It's a leap of faith, right? Religion became much more relevant and meaningful for thinking people. By that I mean it stressed those ideas of like extreme reactionary responsibilities. This is also referred to as Christian existentialism, right? So the existentialism and Christianity met in the middle. It was a very, very cool thing. So now we got like the science end of things, right? First and foremost, in the science field, you got the clarification of atoms, right? So clarification of atoms in the terms of they're not just these little building blocks. They're not like Legos. They're much more intense, and they contain more subatomic particles. This is going to be discovered by Marie Curie and her husband Pierre. I find it hilarious that Marie Curie is always top billed, and then they always just like, oh, and by the way, Pierre was there. But her analysis and his analysis of a chemical compound called radium and its constant emission of subatomic particles because it lets off electrons constantly because it's an unstable isotope is actually going to not only give them cancer, I think. I'm pretty confident in that, actually. Hold up. Yeah, see? Yeah, like she got aplastic anemia believed to be caused by prolonged exposure to radiation. So anyway, now, yeah, this is like the research also kills her, and but they discovered that subatomic particles were constantly being released by the atoms of radium, trying to show that like there's even smaller things than atoms. Because up until this point, everybody believed that it was just atoms, right? And then another, a German physicist named Max Planck is going to discover that subatomic energy is not what Newton said it was, right? So a big, big glaring thing about all this stuff is it's all about like proving Newton wrong, all right? Like it's not as simple as Newton wanted it to be. Like every reaction, there's a reaction, blah, 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 blah. Now, the subatomic energy, though, that's emitted in spurts, not steady streams, proves Newton wrong because it's untrackable. It's random almost, right? It questions the relation of matter and energy. So that then brings up the ideas of like light energy. Like what is it? Is it particle-based and wave-based? Like what is it? And so it's going to lead to this entire new discovery of thought and ideas in science, right? Especially that of energy. And then you've got your main man Einstein, right? Albert Einstein, a German Jewish, thinker. And he's going to even take Curie and Planck's ideas further in undermining Newton. Now, Albert Einstein's the one that throws everybody off when he discusses the theory of special relativity. Now, some of you are like, Mr. Terry's young and inexperienced. There's no way that he knows things as much as Mr. D does. No, this is one thing I know a lot about. Now, theory of special relativity is the idea that nothing in time and space is constant. It's all relative to the observer, right? So the only way that time's all relative. Time's all relative in the terms of like it's how you yourself are observing it, right? Only constant in the universe is the speed of light, and that is it. So hypothetically speaking, if Shannon was shooting across the galaxies in a rocket ship and going at the speed of light and then looks outside of her window and sees everything whizzing by, well, actually, you wouldn't see much whizzing by at all because you're moving at the speed of light, and so light has to actually catch up to you. Never mind. So anyway, now, like if you're moving at the speed of light, inside the container, inside the spacecraft, time would seem as though it was going slower inside the spacecraft than it was going on outside of the vessel. Or, for example, Einstein used this example to try and explain it to people. He said, if a train is flying by and a woman stands up in one of the train cars and walks forward, right? Her perception of time is very different from the person on the embankment that's watching the train haul by, right? Do you understand what I'm saying? It's all about the theories of time is all relative to the theory of the observer. It's relative, hence relativity, right? So also he discovers that there is a massive amount of energy within atoms, right? Because the recent discovery of the subatomic particle is the neutron, right? The neutron, and a particle that can pass through atoms on its own. And then you got Ernest Rutherford that pops up. Ernest Rutherford is a very, very famous one you've probably heard of in chem class before. He was the one that theorized that the atom could be split by shooting other smaller subatomic particles at it, right? All of these ideas are going to violate Newton's dependable laws, scaring a lot of common people. Because people start to realize that if you split an atom, there's a massive amount of energy contained within the inside of it. And if it releases it all at once, that could be really, really drastic, right? So, now, also what's going to be taken further is good old Freud, right? Freudian psychology is going to be taken even further. I'm going to start here and then I'm going to bump up, okay? So, many believed in the human mind using thinking, right? So, Freud is going to show people basically that our society is completely stupid and doesn't make any sense because it suppresses our base needs, right? So Freudian psychology is going to advance further because many people believe that the human mind uses just consciousness to rationally analyze experience, right? Freud, however, wants to go after the other thing, the unmeasurable, the unthinkable, the unprovable, the subconscious, right? The subconscious and its powerful memories and how it affects our everyday lives. Freud believed that the subconscious, powerful memories, and some type of mental reservoir are the thing that leads us to be irrational and also sometimes induce mania, right? So, because he divides the brain and consciousness into three distinct parts, right? He goes the id, the ego, and the superego. Now, some of you are like taking psych right now and you've already heard some of these things, so just bear with me. Now, the three parts of the brain are constantly at war, according to Freud. And they war with each other in the subconscious, away from the impressions of the relative person. You understand what I'm saying? So you right now in your conscious stream of thought are not interacting with the id, the ego, the superego because you're in your conscious state. It's mainly in your subconscious. Now the id is the primitive, the caveman, the entirely unconscious, the source of like aggression and sexuality, pleasure-driven decisions. So you're totally immoral. Your id is totally immoral. It does not care. It's like the devil on your shoulder, right? The id is the devil, whereas the angel is the superego, right? The conscious, the internalized voice of parental and social controls. You're considered almost puritanical in a sense. It's like, don't do that. Yeah, that's your superego, right? The ego is you. All right, if you've ever seen like any show where there's the angel and the devil, the person in the middle is always talking back and forth to each side. That's the ego. It's the great conscious negotiator, right? Trying to listen to both of them at the same time. It's actually where that image of like the angel and the devil come from, is the conflict of those mindsets. So, going forward though, literature also is going to lurch forward during this time period. It's influenced by pessimism and relativism and the alienation of post-World War life, World War I life. In the terms of, again, it's a reaction to the extreme war that they just witnessed, right? That told 45 million casualties. So, writers are going to turn away from the perfect protagonist and his entourage, and they're going to start to go more towards the confused and distorted personalities of the post-World War I individual. Like, what I mean by that is instead of discussing, like, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, right, which is that's a romantic novel. So instead of being, like, all about the big team of people that interact with one another, World War I literature is much more about one person and their ability to interact with society around them post-World War I. So a lot of it has to do with feelings and memories and desires that have been forever scrambled by World War I and destroyed by it. So Marcel Proust is a very, very popular one to just try and discuss the ideas of post-World War I literature. He actually wrote a book called Remembrance of Things Past, right? And he wrote it between 1913 and 1927. What it is, though, is just him remembering his childhood. And he did this by, like, just to show you how, like, cagey people were after World War I. He locked himself in an apartment for 10 years and barely ever came out, right? So it's much more about, like, just, like, the constant dreck and the destruction of mankind and its ability to interact with society. So a big thing that literature is going to adopt during this time period is this thing called the stream of consciousness technique, which is going to be implemented by writers. Now, this uses an internal monologue. So the stream of consciousness technique is now a modern technique used in many modern writings, which actually delves into the subconscious, or not the subconscious, but the conscious, like, mental thought of the character that it actually surrounds. Your narrator, your protagonist, right? One of my favorite books, there we go, actually discusses these things a lot, or uses this tract a lot, and it's excuse me, it's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is actually a very, very famous work where it's narrated by the guy named Chief. And now, granted, it wasn't written in this time period, but I'm just saying it's a great example of it. And it's all about his interpretations of what's going on. So anyway, the famous writings, though, of Virginia Woolf, Miss Masheron, I know you can hear me right now, James Joyce, William Faulkner, right? They're going to be like really, really built up during this time period. And they're going to be heavily used, this stream of consciousness technique. Now, James Joyce, his famous tale Ulysses, is actually an alliteration for, or not an alliteration, but it's like a side-by-side story of the Odyssey and the journey of Odysseus back home. But he calls this Ulysses, and Ulysses is actually an Irishman journeying home after being out all night and being in bars. And he interacts with all these people, and it's very, like, gritty. It's got sexual experiences in it, violent experiences in it, like his mental thoughts in it, and it delves into, like, the deep consciousness of people and what they actually sit around and think about. William Faulkner is The Sound and the Fury. He's a Southern writer, and he actually discusses, like, the mental prose of somebody who might be mentally handicapped or mentally deranged, right? So these are, like, just, they break the mold, right? They lash out against everything that has come before them. Then you got the anti-utopian novels. They're going to become very, very popular. Oswald Spengler's Decline of the West. He literally basically said that the West is on its way down right now, as example of World War I. And then T.S. Eliot writes The Wasteland, right? Discusses how we're just basically descending into nothingness and, like, we're destroying ourselves. A big one, though, that you need to put a star next to is Franz Kafka, right? Franz Kafka is going to write things like The Trial, The Castle, The Metamorphosis. These are dystopian, alienated world ideas, right? All of his ideas, and, like, went after ideas of, like, almost Orwellian ideas. The overlords, the scary future, right? And his predictions materialized under Nazi Germany. And he actually himself was a German Jew. So it was really interesting to see that relationship, right? Now we got to get into a lot of pictures and not as much writing, but you'll see. So modernism then going to take a turn. So modernism is a label given to the artistic and cultural movements of the late 19th century and early 20th century. And it can be applied to everything. Art, music, architecture. So the traits of modernism are radical experimentation, challenging tradition, and extreme expression, right? So now let's talk about it in architecture really quick. So in the U.S., you had the birth of skyscrapers, right? Cheap buildings made of steel, reinforced concrete, and electric elevators. So Lewis H. Sullivan and Frank Lloyd Wright are going to be credited with a lot of these early designs of modern architecture, and they clout open interiors and mass-produced building materials, right? So, for example, right there, that is the one of the first skyscrapers ever built. That's in Chicago, right? And another example of, I know that the name of it is, but for some reason it's leaving me. It's an insurance building. So anyway, and then the next one you know of is, of course, modernism, i.e. the Eiffel Tower and its construction, right? Cheap reinforced steel, smooth lines, very even, limited ornamentation, right? So anyway, another big trait of modernism was the idea of functionalism, right? A principle that buildings should serve their best possible purpose, right? A guy named Le Corbusier, which was a Swedish designer, he said a house is a machine for living, which I agree with 100%. Chagusky, this is all you, big fella. HGTV all the way. a house is a machine for living. So open floor concepts and Property Brothers and Fixer Upper. But they touted the idea of beauty and clean straight lines on buildings, not decoration, right? So it's not meant to be glitzed up. It's meant to be clean and straight and orderly. So following Le Corbusier and the ideas of modernism, this thing is going to be invented called the Bauhaus, right? The Bauhaus was an actual school. It was an interdisciplinary school that applied fine arts and brought together the leading modern architects, designers, and theatrical innovators. It was an arts school. It was one of the very first international interdisciplinary art schools that had ever existed in all of European history. And these are some examples of some of the products that the Bauhaus put out. This internal design of a home. This is the Bauhaus itself. It's still actually there, and people still go to school there. This is an example of a Bauhaus modernism design concept. The idea that these tables can be pushed out and then pushed underneath one another for easy storage. This is a modernist designed chair because it's meant to recline and relax and be the most functional piece of furniture it can be. And this is a modernist designed coffee pot, right? So now, the big thing about this stuff is just the imagery, the look of it, right? World War I changed the way that everybody looked at society. So, Impressionism. Now we got to talk about artistic movements. Oh. Now, anyway, speaking of art, Impressionism is the idea that you're going to look at the everyday for inspiration, turns your back on battles of militaries, the wealthy, religious scenes, right? The most famous Impressionists are guys you've heard of, right? And one lady you probably haven't. Now, Claude Monet, Degas, Mary Cassatt, right? So, and then it's going to move into Post-Impressionists and Expressionists, right? They're going to add deep psychological meaning to the very, I didn't even finish that sentence right there, to the mundane and to the normal, right? And Vincent van Gogh is your most famous post-impressionist or expressionist, right? Like very, very lively scenes of the simplest of things, right? That actually give feeling towards it, right? Then you got secessionists, which are heavily decorated images with inner feelings. Gustav Klimt is a very, very prominent one. The Kiss is his most famous piece of art. My wife's a big fan. And then you got Cubism, which is a complex geometry of zigzagging lines and angled overlapping planes. And the big one for that is Picasso. Now this is in his Cubism phase. He had a lot of phases, but anyway. So this is Claude Monet's Impressionism. That piece right there is actually at the Barnes Foundation in Philadelphia. And then you've got, this is Degas. He did a lot of ballerinas. He liked dancing movements and the ideas of like young kids dancing and like the just ballerinas. He just liked to paint ballerinas a lot. And then Mary Cassatt was a really, really cool one because she really loved to use Impressionism to really analyze the relationships of families, right? This is one of her most famous pieces. This is Louise feeding her child. And it tries to show the relationship between a mother and a daughter, right? The close personal bond. Then you've got Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night, right? The look over a town and just the ridiculous amount of imagery and emotion evoked by the celestial bodies. And one of the most mind-blowing thing about Van Gogh's works is the very visible brushstrokes, the globs of paint, right? That, like, earlier on people would have thought was ridiculous. And then you've, of course, got sunflowers, right? And I love this one because it just shows, like, to me, it shows like it's almost tortured. They're dying, you know what I mean? Like they're nothing permanent. Nothing is permanent, right? Everything degrades, and it's just like, ugh. So, and then this is, of course, Gustav Klimt's The Kiss, right? Heavy, heavy ornamentation and decoration, the gold leafing, just a very regular scene of two people kissing, right? So, and then, of course, Picasso's Cubism phase, right? His Cubism phase, some of them are really, really cool, like because you got to kind of almost hunt and look for the image itself. Now, let's get weird, though, all right? So, anyway, you've got non-representational art by Kandinsky, Vasil Kandinsky, right? So turn away from nature completely and let's just do a bunch of weird stuff, right? So then you move into Dadaism. Now, Dadaism is a reaction to the absolute shock of World War I, okay? It challenges every single traditional idea out there. It delights in the outrageous. It wants to show you that, like life, art's also meaningless. Then you move into Surrealists, which are my personal favorite. I love Surrealism. Surrealism portrays unconscious art, the dreamscape, if you will, right? A world of like just wild, ununderstandable things and uncomfortable symbols, right? Salvador Dali is the very, very big surrealist, right? Politically, though, a lot of these artists are going to align with the far left, and they're going to express that in their art, right? So anyway, but let's get weird. So this is non-representational art. This is a Kandinsky, right? So it's, yeah, that's some after World War I stuff right there. I hate non-representational art. I could do this right now with a pen and some colored pencils. So anyway, this is Dada, right? I'm going to show you a bunch of Dadas. Now, this is Dadaism at its finest. That's a urinal, right? And it was just basically popped up, taken out, set in a scene, and they call this one The Fountain. Get it? You go to the bathroom in it. The Fountain. It's very meta, right? So anyway, now, this is another Dada as well. Like it's in French, I think it means the mechanical head. I think it's trying to show like the mechanisms of humankind. And then this is another Dada as well, completely challenging anything, whether it be paint or structure or just everything. This is another Dada piece as well, showing war veterans, as you can see, like the amputated legs, another amputated leg, and then the wheelchair, prosthetic arm right here. And then, now this is the good stuff. This is Salvador Dali at his best. This is surrealism. This is his famous piece called The Persistence of Memory, the one with the melting clocks, right? So, and then you've got The Temptation of St. Anthony is one of my other favorite ones by him. And it's like tries to take a biblical scene and put it in one of the most uncomfortable ways possible, right? With like just these legs and these people and the nude figures. And then this is a really cool one. It's The Birth of Modern Man. And it's one of his famous pieces. He loved using certain symbols over and over again. Like he loved eggs because he tried to show like the hard exterior, but then the soft interior for contrast, right? That nothing is actually the way that it seems. And then you've got modern music, which is where we're going to stop. Now, The Rite of Spring by Igor Stravinsky. We're going to listen to it a little bit in class tomorrow when y'all are coming in. Modern music is meant to express emotional intensity. It doesn't make any sense. It actually almost caused a riot in Paris because of a dance company, also due to the music itself. People said that every single time that the note that was next to come, the one that came was the one that came after that note. And so it's just very like the last minute of The Rite of Spring. I challenge you this evening to go to the last minute of The Rite of Spring and listen to it, and try to not listen to it at full volume because it's just like it's very intense, okay? As I'm getting older, I'm starting to get more and more into classical music, and The Rite of Spring is very, very intense stuff. Now, also though, you've got Alban Berg. His famous opera called Vazek, right? Vazek was an opera that was about a very Kafka-like soldier driven to terror and mental degradation because he was suspicious of an unfaithful mistress. So this is just some stuff to show you like the shock that World War I just blasted all over society. But yeah, we'll talk about it a little bit more tomorrow. And tomorrow, though, we're also going to get into the mass culture media. And then we're going to finish up the Great Depression. And by Tuesday, we should be in World War II. If only we had moved this fast all year, right? But y'all enjoy the rest of your evening. I'll see you later.